Hello, BookTube. In June, booktubers tend to take stock of how their reading year has gone so far. Usually, this is done through the mid-year freakout tag, but I'm going to join Brian of Bookish in not doing the mid-year freakout tag this year, and instead, I'm just going to talk about my reading and do some top and bottom fives. So my reading year so far can be divided in two: my manga reading and everything else. My manga reading has been spectacular. I have loved every moment I have spent with my manga. It's been wonderful, and I would love to make a separate video where I just focus on my manga reading, but I don't really know how to talk about manga critically. Maybe I'll try that for Monday, but no promises. But it's been wonderful, and you are going to hear me wax lyric about Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia tomorrow, which may be at least 30 minutes, could be up to an hour, depending how I go. But I wanted to focus this video on everything else. And I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. My manga reading has been spectacular. Everything else, not so much. So dividing the everything else into halves, the fiction and nonfiction, my fiction reading continues to bitterly disappoint me. I like the number of novels I have read this year can be counted on one hand. It's frustrating. It's frustrating, and I don't know what to do about it. And my nonfiction reading has been better. I finished starting a lot more books, but even there, my passion isn't quite there as it has been the last few years. So I don't know what to make of this. So let's go with the bottom and top of what my not manga reading has been, because I really can't. Yeah, I mean, I have a suspicion if I did sort of involve manga, I probably would just spend most of this video, just having a blast talking about that and have to rush everything else. So I'm going to focus more on the fiction and nonfiction. So starting with my bottom, the most disappointing books I've read. I have two, in both stacks, there are two novels and 3 works of nonfiction. So in the worst 5, so the novel that I managed to finish for the first time that disappointed me was The Trees by Percival Everett. So this is a novel, so it's a satire about race relations in the United States. It's set in the city of Money, Mississippi, and it's about a gang of vigilantes who are targeting the descendants of the men who lynched Emmett Till. Basically, at the scene of each murder, the men are brutally murdered and castrated. Their testicles are in the hands of a deceased African American male who is made up to look like Emmett Till. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigation sends 2 investigators to determine what's going on, and gradually there are more murders. The murders start to spread, and there are a number of copycat vigilante groups. The satire worked on the first day of my reading, because this lasted about a work week, I think. So the first day, the humor sort of worked, but as the novel went on, it started to get more and more grating. And I found the book more and more not worth the time to read. I wish I had bailed on it. So yeah. The most disappointing book on this bottom 5 is The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. So this is a historical novel set in the late 30s and 40s and into the early 50s about two cousins, Joe Kavalier and let me see if I can find the other cousin. So Joe Kavalier is a Czech Jew who flees to New York and lives with his cousin Sammy Clay. And together they become comic book creators. And they create a superhero called the Escape Artist. And the novel just follows their lives from the time Kavalier comes to New York through to his reappearance decades later. So I had to go at this book when I was 17 or 18, so 20 years ago. And I remember really enjoying the book up until a certain point where I was thrown out of the book. I stopped reading. But it's kind of always set with me that I always wanted to come back to it and do a bit of redemption. And the opportunity came a few months ago when Kieran of Katie Books made a triptych of videos in which he listed 10 classics he thought his audience should read or must read. Steve Donahue made response videos, and I did as well. Although when it came to my third video, the 10 contemporary classics you must read, I didn't really have anything. But Steve's video gave me an idea. Because of Steve's 10, I have a reading experience of 3 of them. One of which I read and loved. The other 2 of which I bailed. And those 2 bails gave me the idea, well, what other candidates for a contemporary classic have I bailed on? And maybe I should give them a bail redemption shot, which is my sort of assessment, my second look at books that or sometimes more, books that I had previously bailed on. So I gradually picked up the 10, of which Michael Chabon, or of which The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay was on Steve's list, and is one that I bailed on, obviously. And so I was desperately hoping that I would get on with this book, that I would push through that scene, which comes relatively late in the book. And I didn't even make it past the first 100 pages. I just was not feeling it. And that frustrates me to no end. And that was pretty much a sign of the other 9, well, technically 5 books. Because I think I didn't pick up 3 of the 10. Yeah, and then the rest of them just turned out as bad as well. It's frustrating. So moving on to the nonfiction, this is the work of nonfiction the most disappointing work of nonfiction that I finished, and that is Assyria by Eckart Frahm. So this is a history of Assyria. Assyria was an ancient civilization in the north of Mesopotamia, based on the city of Ashur, although gradually it began transformed from a city kingdom to a territorial kingdom and to an empire. This is, I think, probably the first book on Assyria to come out in quite some time. And while there's a lot of good stuff in this book, there are numerous chapters, particularly towards the end of the book, that I just had a lot of trouble with. And that really brought my estimation of the book down significantly. So, yeah. Now, not quite similar to The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, because I did finish this when I read it, but my reread of it was disappointing, and that is China's Cosmopolitan Empire by Mark Edward Lewis. So this is an introduction to the Tang Dynasty, and I really did not get on with this reread, to where I ultimately decided to bail on it. And I guess it's probably because I want more than just an introduction to the Tang. I want a big narrative history of the Tang, and I don't know where to get it or where to look. So, yeah. And finally, on the worst books or most disappointing books, I should say. And the one that I'm regretting buying. I'm absolutely regretting having bought this book, and that is Bad Gays by Hugh Lemmy and Ben Miller. So this book is based on the podcast called Bad Gays by Hugh Lemmy and Ben Miller, in which the two give brief biographies and an overview of various historical figures who were gay or in some way queer, who are not necessarily the most heroic, or who don't quite fit in with our contemporary standards of what a heroic historical figure would be. So the book came out more than a year ago, and I had spent much of last year hemming and hawing and debating with myself whether or not I should ultimately buy this book, because the introduction is incredibly off-putting to me. But I mean, I was hoping maybe the individual biographies, the individual chapters would sort of sell the book, or I would enjoy that more. And I didn't. I really did not like this book, and I am seriously regretting having bought it. And I will possibly go on a rant about this tomorrow, depending on how long my raving of Jujutsu Kaisen and My Hero Academia goes, because, yeah, I really want to talk about them and not go on a rant on Bad Gays, even though that might be cathartic. So, but I really don't quite understand my criticism. Like, I don't understand, or I'm not entirely sure how to sort of vocalize my issues with the book. So hopefully I can do that tonight and talk a bit more tomorrow in weekly reads. So now on to the books that I liked, mostly. So the one novel that isn't a reread that I read and I liked is The Seven Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. So this just won last year's Booker Prize, and it's an urban fantasy in which a Sri Lankan photographer, a gay Sri Lankan photographer, is murdered in the midst of the Sri Lankan Civil War. The ghost of Maali Almeida has 7 days to settle his earthly affairs before he goes off into the afterlife, whatever that is, or however that turns out. And so he basically tries to get in contact with his roommates and his mother and tries to get them to find his stash of photos to try to lead them to what happened to him. And it kind of takes on a more traditional sort of urban fantasy, more traditional fantasy type narrative. I rather liked the book. I thought it was highly entertaining, even if there really wasn't many characters to root for. But I thought the ending was disappointing. I thoroughly enjoyed my reread of The Master of Go by Yasunari Kawabata. This is a novel based on a true story. Kawabata was a reporter for the retirement match of Honinbo Shusai, who was a revered figure in the Go world. And his so he had a retirement match against a young up and coming Go player named Minoru Kitani. And so this book is basically a fictionalization of that retirement match, as well as a meditation on modernity, tradition, art, Go, all of that. And this reread was brilliant. I absolutely loved my reread of this book. So moving on to the nonfiction. My second favorite nonfiction book that I read that it was new to me was The Restless Kings by Nick Barratt. This is a brief overview of the first Plantagenet kings, really the Angevin part of the Plantagenets. So when Henry I died, he left as his heir his daughter Matilda, who at the time was married to Geoffrey of Anjou, who was famous for having a feather in his cap, hence Plantagenet. So when Matilda's son with Geoffrey became King of England, he basically united not only the Norman English kings' territories, the England and Normandy, but also his father's territory of Anjou. His marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine further enhanced his territories by bringing in Eleanor's Duchy of Aquitaine. Hence, at the time, Henry controlled more of France than the French king did. Although at the time, the French nobility were largely semi-independent of the French king. It's kind of a bit complicated and something I would love to look a bit more at. But so the book follows basically Henry II's reign, as well as the reign of his sons, Richard I and John. And so the book ends with John's death shortly after Runnymede, I think. So and I love this book. It was really good. Short though, but it was fun. So my favorite book, work of history that I read that was new to me was The Mongol Storm by Nicholas Morton. So this is a history of the Mongol Empire in the 13th and 14th centuries, focused mainly on the Middle East. So, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed the book. It features a number of like societies and cultures at the time, the Crusader states, the I'm blanking on what Egypt was before the Mamluks, which is annoying, but so like Egypt, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Turks, the Mongols, the Latin Empire of Constantinople, other European states who kind of had appearances as well. This was a fun book to read. I really enjoyed it. And my favorite reread in history was SPQR by Mary Beard. This is an idiosyncratic history of Rome that I read for the Steve Tiberius Donahue Book Club, or Book Club STD. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed my reread of this. So, that was my year so far. So, looking ahead, because I've been wanting to do a video in which I talk about what I'm planning on reading for the rest of the year, or at least the booktube events I'm going to be joining in on. Excuse me. So I'm going to continue with Historathon for sure, and that's throughout the year. For July, I'm going to do my Reading America project again. I know what I'm going to do. I've already got the book. Probably will be the vanguard of my book haul, unless I change my mind about that, but it probably will be. I just need to figure out how I'm going to read it because it is a pretty big anthology. And I'm also going to do BookTube at War, which is a BookTube event that looks at, I think ideally was like military fiction or war and fiction, but it's since been expanded to also include history. So I might read some military history. I'm also probably going to read some manga because a lot of the manga I read do involve conflict and war at some point or other in the narrative. I know July is also Jane Austen July. Yeah. And I'm not going to do that because I have no interest in reading Jane Austen. And I don't know what other events take place in July. So if any strike my fancy that I hear of, I might jump in on them too. So in August, I'm going to do my back to school project, even though it did not quite turn out how I'd hoped last year. There's always this year might be more successful. And it also will give me an opportunity to go through my shelves to look for books that I haven't gotten to yet, that I've been meaning to. So that's a plus, and I'm kind of, and also the formation of the TBR is always fun as well. So there's that. I don't know if I'm going to do Garb August. I don't really have much trash that I particularly want to read. So I don't know. I'll think about it. And there's also Faulkner in August, which I don't think I'll do because I don't really have much Faulkner. And I don't know if I really want to read him either. I'll think about it. And I don't know what else. Oh, yeah. Women in Translation Month, which I will do. I'll probably do, because the second language, of course, in my back to school is I'm going to use for Women in Translation Month. Also, I'm probably get to some history and that's in translation, and of course manga. I'll probably reread, I think, Taliban Hanako-kun in August, or I might reread Fullmetal Alchemist. I don't know yet. For September, I'm going to read all of Conan with Michael K. Vaughan. I think there's also Space Opera September. I think that's still a thing. I don't know. So I have an idea for that. I don't know if Shorty September is still a thing or not. And I'm not going to do Shake Timber, Shake Tube, whatever the hell it is this year, because I really have no interest in reading Shakespeare. October is Victober, and I don't know if I really want to participate in Victober. I've tried Victober several times, and it never works out for me. Also, there's the Kundal Prize, which I'll talk a bit more about when the long list is done or is announced. So part of me wants to read along with the prize again this year, but the way things are looking, the way I'm feeling, I don't know. If the long list and the ultimate short list intrigues me enough to where I want to pick them up, maybe. Or if I already have them in my collection. But I don't know. I mean, if my history reading really starts to pick up in the second half of the year, maybe I'll focus a bit more. I'll be a bit more gung-ho about the Kundal. In November, it's Nonfiction November, so I'll probably focus almost exclusively on nonfiction. I know there's also New Worlds in November, but I think my August reading plans, or some of my August reading plans, as well as my September reading plans, probably will science fiction me out. So I probably will pass on that. And then in December, I don't know, because it's really nothing that goes on, and I don't know if I really want to do another Bell Redemption December. But there's some months to go before I decide one way or the other. So anyway, BookTube, this has turned into a bit of a rambling video, so I'm going to go ahead and sign up for now. So I will be back tomorrow, certainly with weekly reads, maybe with a tag video in the morning or early afternoon, depending. I do really want to get to like an original tag. I do want to make an original tag, and I need to really hunker down and make it. So anyway, BookTube, until tomorrow, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.